Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Conversations program this afternoon. My name is Emily Villar and I manage this edition of the Conversations program in Basel this year. And we're delighted this afternoon to have a wonderful panel for the artist and the gallerist. And we have Artist Pilvi Takala in conversation with her gallerist, Vanessa Carlos. Moderating the panel this afternoon will be Christina Li, a curator and writer mostly based in Amsterdam, I think these days, but also spent some time in Hong Kong. And I'll very shortly hand over to Christina to do the proper introductions to our speakers this afternoon. But just a kind reminder to please keep your masks on at all times. There'll be a chance to ask questions towards the end of the talk, and our moderators will hold out the microphone for you to speak into, but please keep the mask on. Thank you very much. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Christina.
Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everybody. And it's my distinct pleasure to be here today to moderate a recurring series of conversations at Art Basel that looks into the relationship between a gallerist and an artist. Well, against the backdrop of a fair and the art market, this panel really offers a frank and informal conversation about the unique and fundamental relationship between two, in my mind, category-defying women whose work I really have a lot of respect for, the artist Pilvi Takala and gallerist Vanessa Carlos. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to both our speakers today. Pilvi Takala is in the center, whose work always, most of the time, employs performance and video to explore accepted norms and behaviors in different situations. Her work is often involving a lot of research into communities and to develop performative interventions that are shown in her video works. A little kind of side note, I'm actually going to be curating her upcoming Finnish pavilion project in the Venice Biennale, and we also have worked for quite a long time, so I'm excited to to moderate this panel. And then we have Vanessa Carlos, who started Carlos Ishikawa in 2011. So this year, I think it's the 10th anniversary of the gallery. So I think it's a really beautiful moment to kind of look back into the relationship that you've had with Pilvi. And in the beginning, as far as I know, performance is really seen as an experimental boundary-dissolving practice that informed your gallery. And the artist in your program challenges aesthetic conventions of conceptual art and a focus on art that's able to operate on an effective emotional level as well as on a rigorous intellectual level. So with all these introductions put into place, first off, I wanted to ask Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit more how you and Pilvi met? I know that it's particularly meaningful to have this conversation here in Basel. Maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, in 2011, I was still working for other galleries, and I came to Basel. I was going to open later that year, and I saw this incredible, I think there was 3 pieces of Pilvi's at Kunsthalle Basel in this group show called How We Work. And I wrote her a weird fangirl email being like, I'm going to open a gallery soon. And something that I've continued to do since we opened the gallery is I tend to work with very young artists before they've shown anywhere. So often they're still in art school, and I really enjoy that process of showing the same support to them throughout. And Pilvi is one of the few artists that I took on who were already quite established. Pilvi every month has 15 museum shows, and so I felt very honored that it felt like a big leap of faith that she even humored my conversation. And then the gallery opened late 2011, and our show was in 2012, right? Our first show. Yep. And it was really nice because Pilvi was so receptive to having a conversation about her work, and in the end, I ended up even participating in the first work that we showed, which was a project about these lotteries that happen in the UK, and we had to each call in, and so I felt very honored that she even spoke to me.
Yeah, Pilvi, maybe, because I know at that time when Vanessa reached out to you, you already have a gallery, and then what crossed your mind when you got this email from Vanessa, who at that time was in the process of setting up a gallery? And also, in your mind, what does a gallery do for you?
Okay, I guess the email was like, I think Vanessa said something about the work that was like nice and smart, and then also it was like you were saying what was actually happening, like I'm planning to open a gallery, you know, like this is the situation. But then the plan was like, yeah, let's meet when we're in the same place. And luckily I ended up then spending a lot of time in London, I think 2011 and 12, or, you know, so there was a chance to then hang out. But I think the first conversation we had was like 3 or 4 hours long or something.
Yeah. I was also really intimidated to meet Pilvi because I don't know if you've seen her films, but she's so hardcore. Like she'll put herself in these situations like, So I was like, oh my God. And then actually she's like so friendly.
It's like normal.
No, because you also like to kind of figure, I think just kind of going back to the introduction, you really try to figure out a situation and you intervene in the situation to kind of see how things kind of fall apart. And I guess that's also the works that you saw in the first works that you saw in Kunsthalle Basel when it was the trainee, I remember perhaps, and the bag lady and
yeah, like
work.
Pilvi, she went to work at Deloitte, you know, this big multinational corporation for a month, and she did no work and she had secret cameras and she would just sit there with no computer. And they'd be like, her coworkers would ask if she was okay, and she'd be like, I'm just doing some head work. And it was just so relentless, like to do that for a month. And yeah, so I was just like, wow, she is hardcore. And
yeah, I think, like, because you asked, like, what is a gallerist, which is a good question. I think it's a different thing for different artists. I guess somebody who supports the career and the work long term, or the meaning is to do that. But then for me, I wasn't really like looking for a gallery, obviously, or was quite suspicious whether working with galleries is something that is useful for me or helpful for the things that I do. But I think because of the conversation, and again, like, that is really just about the work, about, like, you know, why I make the work, what is exciting about it, then yeah, it was just seemed like, why not, you know, it can also be support that is just intellectual support and not only like, oh, you know, you have something to offer, or there's this like useful thing, you know, some kind of exchange that is more practical. So I think that's why I, of course, first was a bit like, well, you know, let's do one show, why not? And then like, yeah, it just felt like a good idea, or a way like that makes sense to work together. If there's a good conversation, why not continue? Whether it is like, yeah, big or small space. And I think something that is quite special, because I mostly like do my work so that I intervene somewhere and I have to improvise and decide what happens. But in some works, I ask for people's help, and it's also like an improvised situation. And so early, you know, I could ask Vanessa to like do something in my work, like, you know, that you would get it, like what it's about, or, you know, what, you know, because you can give people instructions, but they often misunderstand, and, you know, and then you just wouldn't use it. But like, so that says a lot about like that there's somebody who understands what the work is about, but also is like a challenging conversation, not just like, it's fantastic, keep going, you know, that it's like, yeah, it pushes forward the work. So I think, yeah, that's what's really special. So I think, yeah, just started off really well.
But do you think that, I mean, the work that Vanessa, you were part of, would you kind of see that as some sort of testing ground to see if you guys jive? Because I think, as you just said, you know, like, perhaps what you expect from a gallerist is not like, hey, I want someone to represent me in the kind of commercial art world necessarily, because, I mean, we can discuss that a little bit, because most of your work, I guess, goes quite directly to institutions, and they commission works, etc. So like the way you exist in the gallery system is also a little bit more, you know, a little bit peculiar, or not like you're gonna have market success, that kind of artist. So did you feel like that was more, you wanted to start first as a collaboration to see where this conversation could go? Because when we were preparing for this talk, Vanessa, you also said something quite beautiful, is that you really like how pure the conversation that you have with Pilvi, because you enjoy talking to her to understand how to think about the world. So I mean, that was something I was really touched to hear. So maybe can you talk a little bit about how this first collaboration, maybe also maybe talk a little bit more as for those who don't really understand that piece, because you kind of hinted upon, well, it could go all directions. Like, let's say you can cut that part that you recorded off.
Yeah, so basically this piece had a few different components, but the one, there was this idea that there's a postcode lottery that exists in the UK and also in the Netherlands, where you basically, your lottery number is your postcode, but it also relates to how, like, in different areas, I mean, if you say postcode lottery, it also would mean that, like, where you live has to do with what kind of public services you deserve or get or can have or have access to, or so there's this, like, it could be like, of course it's privilege often, and then I figured out, I don't know from where, that you could play, you don't really have to play with the postcode where you live, and I just wanted to try if I could play with Buckingham Palace postcode, and I phoned them and they were trying to talk me out of it, but in the end they let me play, so I still have my lottery going, I guess, I suppose. And then I think I asked if you could call and just see if you get a different answer. And then they told Vanessa that actually some people play with the Buckingham Palace postcode. And then Vanessa would just go like, oh, that's a great idea, I will also do it. But like when you make this phone call, you don't know what they're gonna say, and then you just have to improvise. And sometimes when I work with people and it's a similar situation, you try to say, like, if they say this, then you say that, and you sort of just have to go with the flow. And I mean, this was not so, like, heavy production, and quite simple thing to do, but also you sort of have to get the
I mean, for me,
vibe.
it's fun also because, like, I went to art school and I gave up on being an artist halfway through and decided that I would work with artists instead. And this thing that you're referring to, Christina, is like, when I think about how I choose artists, especially working with artists so young, like I always say this, I'm really more interested in how the person thinks and how they understand the world, because you really hope that they haven't made their best work at that age. And so what I want to think is, like, wow, just the way that they process all these structures that we have to exist in is something that I'm interested in and I want to keep thinking about. So I almost selfishly get to, like, explore my own ideas through their research and their conversation. And it's true that with Pilvi, obviously because video works differently in the art market, what I love is that her process is so research-based that she will spend, maybe 18 months researching a project in and out, and then we'll touch base a few times throughout the project and really try and deconstruct what the idea is the path she's following, is it doing the things she wants it to do. And when I say that it's kind of pure is because although I also have a very close relationship with, say, painters that have a big market or whatever, it's just that Pilvi and I never have to talk about that kind of stuff. So we just talk about ideas, and that feels nice, and like I said, she has this big institutional support from before I met her, and I think that it feels really nice that the role that she has let me have for her is being somebody else who knows the practice in depth and can always sort of check in with, like, the direction that she wants the piece to go.
Maybe then this is a good point to talk about how your relationship has evolved, because I would imagine, like, in 2012 when you did the first show and Vanessa, you were in the work. And then in 2018, you made another show together. Also, your gallery then also had, the program has changed, and also it's probably got more attention, etc. So do you actually feel that your collaboration has changed throughout both of your growths in the work you do?
I feel like it's been pretty consistent. It just keeps developing. And in a normal year, Pilvi and I are like zigzagging across the world, and we'll just meet several times. Like, do we just happen to be in the same city? And we have time for our personal relationship as well as our sort of professional one. So I wouldn't say that it's changed. I guess it just kind of deepens, when you've known someone for 10 years and you see them grow and you see their personal life grow and go through difficult things together. I think both of us in our personal lives have had a lot of big shifts in this time, and not this time, in the last decade, obviously.
Correct.
And so I would say that it's always been consistent. It's just deepened. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the work changes, but it should. And then, lifestyle. I think I travel less, so I don't see you so much. So I have to
But I travel more.
So. Yeah. So I guess you come to me more now than sometimes. And I think it just was really nice in the beginning to get to actually hang out like a lot when I could be in London, and sometimes I like miss that because it's
Yeah. But actually, I remember when we were discussing this talk, I mentioned something to Christina that felt like an important moment. Like, there was a point some years ago where Pilvi was resolving a work, and I was really really questioning so hard why she was going in one direction. And then she said something to me that was really good, and that has stayed with me, where she was like, maybe my work is changing, and you need to accept that I myself don't exactly know where it's going to land. And I was like, that was such a good grounding, because as a gallerist, you're like the #1 fan basically of every artist that you work with, and you love what they've done, and you have an idea of what it is, but and you want it to keep growing and evolving, but sometimes you haven't quite caught up to it yet. And I thought, that's true, I need to really be conscious about making as much space as possible for, the last thing I want to do is ever restrict where the work might go or where the idea might develop. And so I really kept that with me actually for all my other artists that I work with.
Yeah, that's nice. I also remembered I had this moment, it's not so long ago, when I had too many things going on, and I was working on something new, but it was basically too much. So I think you were at my place in Berlin, and then we talked about whatever was a work that was more resolved. And then I had something else, and then you asked about it, and I was just I can't talk about it. And then I'm normally I can and I want to talk about it, that it's I'm, I spend so much time researching, that's that's really what I want to do. But then I was just it was late night also, whatever, many excuses, but then this feeling it's not even, I don't have the energy for this work now that I even could explain it to you, and that felt okay, I have to check my, because I try to prioritize, but sometimes it's just there's too many things going on.
And also for me, sometimes, because I have a very personal relationship with all my artists, Pilvi made a work, she had a stalker for a while, and it was quite scary actually. And then Pilvi decided to make these stalking obsessive emails into an artwork, and so she was really engaging with it, and I remember feeling very personally worried for you. And this stalker, they were banned by the police to be anywhere near Pilvi, but then they came in the end to your museum show, didn't they?
Yeah, at some point. Yeah. So it's a situation that it's being, it's still there, it's not very active, but something to be managed. Yeah, I remember you were I just don't want anything to happen to him.
Yeah, I was very worried about that.
But maybe if you, I know the work, but maybe if you feel comfortable, maybe you can talk a little bit more about this specific piece, if you feel just giving a little bit more context and color to it.
Yeah. So basically I had this fan / online troll, somebody who contacted me anonymously, having seen my work and was obsessive. Kind of textbook troll or stalker. So I guess, and I had a museum show coming in Finland, and this was a long period of time. So there was maybe 3 years before the show when everything started. So I wanted to see if I could do something about the situation, which is somehow the main thing to do is to do nothing and hope for the best. Like, not give attention to this person, but then I wanted to find some other way to play with it. So in the end, I made this contract with the person, who still remains anonymous, and we exchanged a lot of emails in negotiation of this contract, which then became the work. So it's a video installation with a lot of screens where the emails are being written, and the contract where basically it's about positions. So I have some special power because I was showing in the National Gallery in Finland. What I say will be heard, unlike mostly if you have a stalker or troll, nobody really will have your back. But in this specific situation, I could sort of take the step to engage with it a bit more and try to negotiate with this person and make some make some rules. Obviously, they are breaking the rules, and it's never going to be airtight. But I just wanted to see if I could use somehow that power I have to deal with this issue a bit more than just try to pretend it's not happening.
But it was interesting because you balanced the power, meaning they had a voice that was sort of public, but at the same time you were taking power back by setting the terms of what that relationship was going to be, that this anonymous troll was trying to have with you.
Yeah. And I got to talk about it, and it was my narrative basically, and my work in the show. So it is obviously
as I said,
risky.
She's hardcore.
It's very high stakes, the work that Pilvi makes. I think in a way I almost see that Vanessa's part of your posse of collaborators, or kind of sounding board. I think do you think it's fair that you work often in this way, that you have a couple of people in your life that you go back to and then say, hey, what do you think about this? And everyone has a very specific position. Do you see it like that?
Yeah, definitely. I really I couldn't, because the work is such a long process, and I would totally get lost if I didn't try to explain somebody what's happening. But I think with Vanessa, it's really special because it's so long term, and it's I have a lot of colleagues I talk to, but it also depends where they're at. And sometimes with somebody you talk about this one project. Now we're working together. Obviously, we talk a lot about this project that we're working on, but then it kind of comes and goes, but this one is sort of consistent, and it's also interesting to, even if there's a long gap, to try to then explain what is happening and where am I going. It's really special.
Yeah, because I always describe it as being a gallerist, and sometimes I do tutorials at art schools in the UK, and the way that I describe it is you're trying to understand or give or help the artist give language to the thing that they're already thinking. But then really what you do as a gallerist or as a tutor is a game of hot and cold, where you're trying to understand what they're trying to do, and then when they're throwing ideas of what form that might take, you're almost that gets you closer to that, or that gets you further to that, and to be able to have that zoomed out look, because sometimes the artist is so wrapped into the idea, into the detail, and so I always think of that's my role as a gallerist.
No, I think because I'm working with you right now, Pilvi, for the project in the Venice Biennale, and also I've commissioned work from you years ago. So I think it's always interesting when you work with an artist when they're in the process of making something. It's exactly what you're saying, when it's how to give space and how not to over influence, and how do you guys, because you can't talk to each other all the time. And I remember, Pilvi, you would say sometimes you feel this is the moment to give Vanessa a ring, to update her. How does that work for you? Do you just feel okay, I feel I need a shift in thinking? When do you feel it's the right moment to bring Vanessa into the conversation?
I guess you just know it when there's yeah, like I have found these things, there's these things, but I don't know like where to next go. So yeah, it's just like, yeah, I guess you know it when there's a feeling for like it would be good to go through and get my like head clear about like where to.
I think with Pilvi, it's because her research goes so deep that at some point she accumulates so much information. And then the more information, the more possibilities there is for what she can actually draw out for the work. And so I think usually my sense is that when it becomes overwhelming, that you've collected so much information, and then we want to like start separating off again what the possible like the key concept or the key like form that it will take is usually when I get the call.
It's getting worse and worse. Like the accumulation, like it just goes longer and longer, the research, and then I don't know.
Yeah, because I don't know if you're allowed to talk. Are you allowed to talk about your Venice? Well, not yet. Okay, never mind. I was going to give an example of like.
But you can say you started. What you mean?
Yeah.
That means when did you start again?
I started
research of it.
Well, I can give an example, which is like one project we did was Pilvi was awarded like the Freeze Prize. That was £10,000, and Pilvi wanted to actually go to a school and get children to decide what to do with the money. And so at some point, like, they ended up building a bouncy castle, actually, which was very nice. But at some point, it was like interviews with the children, and then like dynamics of education, and then and then suddenly you have so many possibilities, and then also like the sort of not institution, but like the business that is giving the money, wanting to kind of like dictate how the money should be spent, even though they're, they gave Pilvi this award, but then they were kind of like, oh, you can't give it to these children, and so suddenly there's so many different strands you can pull out of what the conversation around that work is. So that's like kind of one example I remember where we had to think a lot about like the format.
Yeah, there was a lot of navigation with this one.
And it was ongoing because the children were from this community center, and they decided, and the people that gave the money were really scared that the children would just want to buy like 100 iPads or something, and they didn't give the kids enough credit. The kids designed this amazing like bouncy house castle that had like a toilet, and it had like all this stuff, and in the end they wanted to rent out the bouncy castle to make money back for this community center, so it was this kind of, it didn't just end with the prize. It was it did have a life beyond that. So there was all these different things that came into it that kept having to be thought about and like considered. And
they were also afraid the kids will buy like something they need, like a washing machine, because they're poor, and then it will look really bad.
Yeah, and they were like, you can't get them a washing machine. It's like, why not? Like,
Where is the bouncy castle? I think we talked
about
it.
Well, that story is sort of sad, but it's a bit long story. But then, of course, for this kind of community projects, you also need the infrastructure. So there was a youth club. They were going to host the castle. Then the youth club was closed because they lost their building. So then, like,
there's no place for the bouncy castle.
And then it's like suddenly a burden. So like, it's fun art thing when you already have a youth club, and then you can like add to it this thing, but
I mean, I think one thing a gallerist also does is to think about the afterlife of a work. I mean, we already kind of like touched upon it very briefly about the kind of work that Pilvi does is not kind of like a painter, like selling works in a certain way. And Vanessa, how do you kind of deal with do you feel the financial pressure, the business side of your gallery work, kind of needing to balance it with, the creative side that you wanted to give the space for Pilvi to develop projects?
Well, this is the thing, like, I have a lot of artists that make film, and film is just difficult. It's usually institutions. There's very few individuals who collect film. And this actually really annoyed me last year when everyone was talking about NFTs. I was like, people can't even figure out how to support film. Like, why are we talking about NFTs? Like, it's this endless frustration I have about video art. And Pilvi has always been incredibly self-sufficient, as I said, even before I came on board, through funding bodies and institutions collect her work. But her projects, they usually take at least a couple of years to develop because it's so, like, the research goes so deep. And so I feel like for all my video artists, I wish I could bring this other side of what I do, like, you know, being here to help them have more income to fund their projects. But with film, it's always like it's like some strange negotiation. But I feel that in terms of like giving it a space, what's amazing is the film festivals and the institutions, like literally Pilvi, at any given moment you look at the calendar and her work is showing in like multiple places. So then I feel like that gives the work an ongoing life and platform. And then luckily you're Finnish as well, because like Nordic countries are good at like supporting artists in some ways. And I suppose like the institutions, when they're showing, they have artist fees, and but it's something I always think about, and you always try and make happen more. But I think the art world really needs to develop this more. And interestingly, sorry that I'm ranting about it now, but it's something close to my heart. I spoke to a couple of collectors this week that are saying that they really want to start focusing on video, and I think that perhaps this is an exciting time when we're talking about like ecological repercussions of things, and the way that we live now is getting more ephemeral in that sense of like how we can. We were told to stop at this part.
Hold that thought.
Yeah. It's not that loud though.
We're back. So I don't know. I feel that I feel optimistic about perhaps more private collections being able to support artwork that is film. And I'm going to keep trying with my artists.
I mean, when you were saying that Pilvi, any given moment, I mean, I went to your website and just like all these film festivals are screening your work. We just was talking about this other film festival you were in Berlin. I guess there's also there's different economies that you kind of operate within. And I think because of that, you kind of have this, I would say, I don't even know, it's a privileged space in a way that you could be more playful with what you're doing with Vanessa. Would you say so?
Yeah, I think there was never with Vanessa any pressure to do something specific or I don't know. Like for me, showing in a gallery is like in any exhibition space. It's not like, oh, now it's the gallery show. Now I mean, the work won't be different, and why would I? I guess earlier people were saying to me like, maybe you should make some prints, some stills or something. But who wants to buy those? So I think it's definitely privileged to be from a place where I mostly live off a Finnish artist grant. And then when I have a project, I can find funding to produce and so on. So it's not relying on the people who buy it. Of course, sometimes some institutions buy it, but it's not. And then also the little I've seen, the film world, that also has very tight space to operate in terms of funding and what you commit to and how many people have a say, on what you make. So I'm very happy here in having a lot of freedom, still being able to produce right now,
And from the gallery's perspective, it's I don't choose my artists with any of that in mind, but it then ends up happening that some become incredibly successful in the market, and then it becomes a sort of redistribution center where you make a lot of the income for the gallery from a few artists, but then that enables you to do very experimental shows in the gallery and or to support shows that will not be commercial. So it works well, I think.
I think what Vanessa told me maybe in our first live meeting was I have money for 2 years to run this space. And I'm just gonna do, it might take off, or that you will just do the shows you want to do and not worry about, because it's not gonna work if you have to be all the time so how are we gonna pay for this and
yeah.
So it worked
Oh,
out?
I mean, recently I was talking to an artist in Amsterdam, and he was telling me that, you know, you were really into his photographs, and you just really took a leap of faith and just encouraged him and showed the work in your gallery. So I think the risk-taking element is something that's really categorizes your program, and I think this redistribution of resources allows for that to foster practices that might not be so commercially viable.
Yeah, like that artist, when I showed him, I think he was 20 or 21, you know, and I just took on a 22-year-old filmmaker as well. But even the artists, that, you know, like Oscar Murillo or Izzy Wood or Korkrit Arananonchai, artists who have, like, you know, this market prominence. When I started with them also, they were all like 23, 24, had never sold anything either. So when you're making that commitment to the artist, yeah, it's a risk, but that's why I like to be led, rather than any other reason, just be led by, like, that I want that person in my life, basically, to help me, like, make emotional and intellectual sense of the world.
I mean, I think what I was also interested to know is, like, how do you, you know, we talked about how you both are, you know, in close contact a lot of the times, and how do you decide when is the right moment to do a show in the gallery? Since a lot of your work kind of operates kind of outside of the gallery, how do you kind of decide, like, okay, it feels like I want to do a show? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
I feel like the first show, it was very much like, you know, the invitation was there and we worked on that new piece, the lottery piece together, but there's this film that I love of Pilvi's called Players, where she plays all the characters of this gambling community in Thailand that her brother is or was part of still. And so I really wanted to show, like, one of the films that made me fall in love with her work and work on something new. And then the next show, it was more like she was working on something already in London, and it was a good opportunity to show it. And I guess, you know, again, because this project Pilvi's working on for Venice Biennale has been a couple of years' work, and it will be shown in Venice. And it's kind of, I don't like to pressure the artists to show something on my schedule. So it's kind of like when they have something ready and it's a good time for them, then with Pilvi also, with all of them, but with Pilvi in particular, because she needs, like, a lot of time to complete these projects, then we show it when it makes sense, really. Yeah.
So do you guys have any plans for the future? I mean, because I guess now it's every 6 years. Like, well, you have 2 shows in the gallery before, so you're waiting for a good moment to kind of...
Yeah, I guess after Venice we have to see. I feel like all energy is on Venice now, right?
Obviously. Yeah, and I'm not now overlaying projects with that.
So is that something also, you know, has the pandemic also somehow shifted your mode of production or shifted your way of operating? Like, either, I mean, this question is for both of you. I'm curious how you guys handle this investment of time and energy, which, you know, this is very much close to your practice, like really researching, spending time.
It has changed. I felt like I was already good at, like, prioritizing and, you know, like traveling less, trying to, like, focus on that, but somehow, then with the pandemic, it was quite clear that if I have one project that I really want to put my time in, with that already all the schedule changes, all the, like, oh, we can't do this now, let's, you know. So then if I had something else that is also moving, it would just take all my energy. So I really was like, now, and it was an easy choice because it's like a big show and project I was really into already before the pandemic started. So it was kind of easy just to be like no to everything else. But before I worked on several things at the same time, or 2 main projects and so on, and it has worked out. But I think, it definitely made things even more,
slower, simple.
Yeah, but I don't miss being alone and talking to people only on the screen.
For me, we decided to not do any shows during the pandemic because most of my artists are not UK based. I thought there was nothing sadder in the world than to, like, have work shipped over. They can't come, the audience can't come, because I thought, the gallery is not a showroom. The gallery is a place where if they've done 70% of the work in the studio, the last 30 happens in the space. And so we just completely closed. But we did things like this reading group. One of my artists, Ed Fornielis, we sort of curated it together every week. Like really, it was almost like a group therapy. It was very intense text on like death and euthanasia and like love. And because I felt that, that's the thing that we want from art, and that became like a viable substitute for like having those conversations. So we just did that for a year. I stayed in touch with all my artists, of course, but like that's how I dealt with the pandemic.
Well, I mean, I think, we're still going through with it. I guess you haven't seen a lot of your artists in person. Like, this is the first time you've seen each other since, I don't really even...
2 years?
2 years.
Yeah.
So has it also made you think about how you kind of work with your artists with all this kind of traveling restrictions that are still in place?
I mean, because they're spread all over the world anyway. A lot of our relationship happens on the phone. I was just missing those like 3 or 4 meetings a year where we'd happen to, be in the same city. But I would say it didn't change at all how I work with my artists. But one of my artists, Izzy Wood, her studio is right next door to the gallery. So we were able to like really support each other through the pandemic, like every single day. And when we had to bubble, like in Christmas, you weren't allowed to see anyone. And me and her were like the bubble, We spent Christmas together in my garden with heated blankets because you weren't allowed to have any visitors into your house and stuff. And so I would say I got closer to a lot of the artists. And sadly with some I still haven't seen them, So
for you, I mean, from what I gather, the way you work or choose to work with certain artists in your program is very much kind of based on like friendship and kind of having, kind of being in the world together and somehow, learning from each other. So it's less about the practice, but more about how, you interact as humans.
Yeah, I think there's many different ways of having a gallery. The way that I've always thought about my gallery is it's just a set of relationships, and I really like the artists to meet each other and to form conversations with each other. And actually with a lot of my collectors and curators we work with, it's the same. Like I feel that, the way I always think of our jobs is like artists are trying to externalize an internal world via some sort of form or object, and my job is to connect that to other people's internal worlds and my own. And so I think of the gallery as a site for that to happen, and that necessarily entails like me and I always think that with a good artist, they can't help but for the work to be an extension of themselves. So for me to know the artist is to know the work. So that really matters to me, and I end up having very close relationships with a lot of the artists for that reason, because I want to know them, but to know them is to know their practice. And
so basically, it's a community, I would say, in a broader sense, like people,
like some of my artists, they call each other gallery siblings, so it becomes like one other question I was curious about, because you both are so kind of, very sharp with the way you work and navigate in the world. I was curious, like, is there something that you treasure of each other, you learn from each other?
A lot, but but I guess it's that like, it's also nice to see, like Vanessa's doing like, I guess I recognize that, like, you know what you want to do, and also when we first met, you would communicate super clearly, like, what are you trying to do, and like and I can't, it was nice in the beginning to also, there wasn't so many artists, but like to hang out and so on, and now I live elsewhere, so it's growing, but then that there's this like, I can trust that you're doing, what you really want to do, and it's somehow so clear always, the conversation, and also like very challenging, and that's really fun. I don't have that like with a lot of people, that it's always like challenging conversation. So But yeah, one thing that I learned I can't name. I think it's all there. You know, we don't know what would happen if we never met.
Fair answer.
Yeah, I don't know if I can, again, I've learned so much, especially through Pilvi's work, but what I admire so much is like, Pilvi has this very quiet but subdued, like complete conviction. And this is when I say she's hardcore, it's a, you know, a quick way of describing this like certainty that she'll have in something she wants to do, and she'll really see it through, but then there's always also like an undercurrent of humor that I like. And it's a way of existing in the world that is so, I like it. It's like, you know, if the goal of like trying to understand life is to be present and to accept and let go or something, there's something of that in a weird philosophical way, I think, in Pilvi's work, where you kind of like observe the absurdity around you and you kind of are bemused by it, you are critical of it, but you kind of stay centered. And I think that's what the work does. It stays centered in its own conviction, but it can see and laugh at and point at and question like all these things. And I think that that's how Pilvi herself exists in the world. And I kind of really admire that.
But I think what I've also noticed in Pilvi's work throughout the years is when, I'm just thinking back when you were talking about when Pilvi said, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, maybe I'm just changing. And I don't know. I also saw a very specific moment in your work where you started not being always yourself in the piece. You know, you're trying to find other people to act out. And I think for me, what's super rewarding also, because I've known you for so many years, is that to see you also taking risks and also learning the fact that you all constantly want to challenge yourself, and the form that you don't want to have a form that's recognizable. You don't want to be trapped in it all the time, because I remember sometimes there was a project we wanted to work on together, and you said, I don't want to do the same thing. And I guess it's exciting, but also as a curator, it's also a little bit scary when you commission someone to do something. You're like, hey, I want something like that. But also, what's so special about collaborating? I see, curating. Your work is always a collaboration, a conversation. Is that also to kind of trust each other, that we're on the same path, and then it's all gonna work out fine.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, I guess that's also a little bit similar in how you are, interacting with each other.
Yeah, definitely. And that was exactly the point where I was like, because Pilvi would often tell the story through her, she would, be physically like in the film, like the vessel for the thing. And it was when she started removing herself that I was like, but, and yeah, and I think it's amazing. I think it's so important not to like repeat the same mechanism almost.
Yeah, and something I just thought of, because I guess if like Vanessa's work is about relationships, my work is also about that. So it's always like, although it's very different way of like, like what you do, I don't know, but that there's always like good observation on like people and behavior, and that's super fun conversation. And yeah, everyone has some, but I think.
Well, we're both like armchair. We're like both armchair social psychologists.
Yes. Just haven't had our like degree.
Well, soon maybe.
We don't have the qualifications, but we have the interest.
I think it's time to open the session to the floor. If there's any questions for our panelist speakers. There's one question here in the front. Right there.
My question is primarily for Vanessa. You talked a little bit about the difficulty getting commercial viability in the video space, and how you thought that taking the conversation in the direction of NFTs wasn't the right conversation when you just have challenges getting video accepted in a commercially viable way. What do you think about, online streaming platforms or other alternative ways to license work?
I think there's some amazing ones existing already, and I hope that they proliferate even more. My reference about NFTs was more that people were pretending that they were interested in supporting like ephemeral forms of art, but really it's just a different way of adding value to a cryptocurrency. So I was like, why don't you just go and trade cryptocurrency over there and like leave us here, please? Because, you know, to dress it as like, oh no, this is about, imagine we can support these like, you know, ephemeral forms of art that traditionally are not supported, is not true. I mean, or at least in my experience, I don't think that that's why people are interested in collecting NFTs for. And if people are interested in that, then I hope that they can support performance and video, which has been around for a really long time and is not supported enough, you know. But yeah, I absolutely think there's a lot of room for more platforms, and I'd be, you know, you have things like Lux, and it would be very exciting if there was something that would become a regular source of income for artists, something like that. Someone should start it.
Is there any other questions for our panelists? Oh, there's one in the back.
Okay, thank you both for the insights. I have one question in regard to, like, I think it's a question to the gallery. To what extent, like for example, I'm working with a very young gallery who are like 2 years old. So me, I'm the artist, and the other ones are the gallerist. And so I have the feeling that the gallery program is like changing in a way. So my question is, like, to what extent does the artist has an impact on the gallery program? At the beginning, or also like at a later point in time, can the gallery program like change in a way, or is it like that at some point then it's so set that it doesn't change anymore?
I guess I have some colleagues whose program almost completely shifts every 5 years or so. I feel that mine has been quite consistent. I didn't understand myself what the consistency was in the beginning, and then I realized that maybe 3 years in, I realized that because my artists aesthetically and in terms of form, they are so varied, and I realized that what I was interested in was people thinking about essentially power structures, if we say, you know, in the bell hooks way, that's like white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, like talking about power structures and their relationship to power structure, either their own or observing relationships to, and then I was like, oh, this is what brings it all together. And then that way, I always thought that there was like a natural conversation there. And I would say that my program has not shifted at all. And actually it's interesting, you can see a lot of galleries like post-Trump, especially in the US, really having to catch up with themselves on like, oh God, I never showed other perspectives. And from day one, I was always interested in other perspectives. So I think that the artists who come into my program are very, I think they understand that. And so I haven't thought about that. But in terms of, for example, the gallery you're working with, I don't know. I think that if the gallerist has a very clear thing that they themselves want to think about, then they will always add artists, but the kind of question will never necessarily, it will complicate, but it will never change. But I think other gallerists go through a creative process where, you know, they're interested in different things, and they'll be focused on something and want to kind of articulate that through one type of artist for a while and then shift it again. So I don't know, but I guess the topic that I'm interested in is so big that it's like, it'll never like exhaust or something. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think a program can completely change. It definitely can. I don't think mine will, but.
Oh, okay. But maybe on that note, I'm curious, I mean, since now it's the 10-year anniversary of your gallery, like are there things that you kind of have in mind for the future? I mean, not meaning like expansion or anything, like, but in terms of like, because I think I'm curious to see what the next steps of your program or your gallery would be. Are there certain threads that you're trying to explore right now, or we can look forward to in the next years?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that actually, and I think that like our life's work, or what I hope my life's work will be, is to like find your own truth outside of all the things, all the structures that are sort of imposed on like whatever your truth is. And so I was really thinking about like 10 years, what does that mean? And, and I was thinking like, in a weird way, I came up with this weird answer, which was like, oh, I just want more. But I was like, more of what? But then I was like, well, more of basically thinking about those things, more of having deeper relationships, more of, getting more people to be able to connect to these artworks. So I didn't have any like, it sounds weird to just say more, but more is actually, when you get in the detail of it, is quite rich.
I guess for me, when you say more, then I would just say how also, like how to get more of that. During the pandemic, I was following the program actually, because you will send out dismissives about these reading lists and things like that. And at that time, it felt like something that was very much in line with your program anyway. And I was really curious if that was that kind of affinity or just a deepening of intellectual discussion is one of those threads that you might want to kind of go deeper into in terms of like creating more or a space for exchange or discourse. But I don't know, I was just curious.
Yeah. I love it that you say that, because actually I just heard that a space next door to my gallery might be empty, and the first thing I thought was like, I can finally make my dream dive bar salon. Like, so let's see if it becomes empty. I have been thinking about activating these other like pathways for the conversations that we like to have, the artists and the gallery and stuff.
Maybe we have time for one last question, if there's any. I guess not. Well, I guess we can end here. Thank you so much, Pilvi and Vanessa, for sharing your insights and being so candid about a lot of the inner workings of your gallery and also your relationship. I really appreciated it. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us here. And thank you, Art Basel, for organizing this conversation.
And thank you.
Thank you.